Question 9. Doesn't Paul explicitly say in Galatians 5 that the law is bondage? Answer. Read answer 6 above, and then read Galatians again. We're going to get a chance to do that later on, so I won't expound on that now. Context shows that Paul is combating ethnic-driven corporate righteousness and ostensible covenant membership based on the social expectation and maintenance of law-keeping. The bondage of chapter 5, verse 1 in Galatians is spiritual bondage spelled out for any believer who might wish to return to a first-century Jewish worldview of corporate/individual salvation and sanctification based on group membership and maintenance of Torah commands. Recall that in covenantal nomism, one, quote, gets in, unquote, by belonging to the group, that is being legally born with or married into Jewish identity, or conversion to the legal status of Jewish. And one, quote, stays in, end quote, by keeping Torah. Remind yourself that neither of these two, quote, gets in, stays in, end quote, facts are true in God's courtroom. Neither of these are true, right? You don't get in and stay in by keeping Torah. Remind yourself that. Thus, Paul is warning the genuine Galatian believers that to, quote, get in, end quote, one places his trust in Yeshua. And that to, quote, stay in, end quote, one waits for the hope of righteousness by faith. The debt to the whole law of verse 3 of Galatians chapter 5, verse 3. The debt to the whole law is a debt to do whatever ethnocentric Jewish conversion policy the hapless Gentile converts would submit themselves to should they venture down that bondage-laden path, a debt that surely excluded group membership and Torah observance for non-Jews. Justification by law in verse 4 of Galatians chapter 5 means ostensible justification by the policy that teaches a, quote, Jewish-only Israel, end quote. So basically, the question, doesn't Paul explicitly say in Galatians 5 that the law is bondage? The context of the answer that I provided is that Paul could not have thought that keeping the Torah was bondage, the way traditional Christian parlance teaches it. And the way we know that Paul could not have thought that, could not have held that view of Torah, is if we simply go back and read the Torah for ourselves, the way that Moses describes keeping Torah in the Torah. What is more, if you continue to corroborate that view of Torah with the rest of Paul's writings, how can Paul say that the Torah is holy and that the commandment is holy, just, and good, or righteous? How can he say those things about the Torah and yet at the same time describe the Torah as bondage? When Paul starts addressing these Gentiles and telling them that to go back under the law is bondage, the law he's referring to must naturally refer to the policy belief that if you are not Jewish, you don't have genuine covenant membership in Israel yet. Meaning, the prevailing Jewish views held in Paul's day, but not by Paul himself. The traditional view within the unbelieving Jewish communities of Paul's day was that the Torah was a Jewish-only document, and that if a Gentile wanted to embrace the Torah as their lifestyle, they had to take on legal Jewish status first. That was what we call the proselyte ceremony that was being presented. And in Paul's writings, this is articulated simply as circumcision. In other words, the shorthand code word circumcision is often used in Paul's writings to describe the social phenomenon of Jewish identity, whether it's natural Jewish identity that you gained at birth as a Jew, or it is the achieved Jewish identity that you gained as a proselyte convert to Judaism. Either one. The word circumcision in Paul's writings is kind of brought forth to describe that social phenomenon. Paul is going to say to those Gentiles wishing to embrace Torah and wishing to be counted as righteous before God, he's going to say to them, if you want to receive God's righteousness, you need to follow in the mercy of Yeshua. You don't need to go through a conversion policy to do it. If you want to be counted into the group, and the group is Israel, by the way, from Paul's perspective, the spiritual group, the lasting group that the Gentiles should be wanting to get into, is only attained by going through the doorway known as Yeshua. It is not entered through a doorway known as conversion. So Paul is going to discourage Gentiles from converting for the wrong reason. Instead, he's going to encourage them to keep Torah. He's going to encourage them to place their faith in Yeshua, albeit minus any ostensible requirement to convert to Judaism in the process. That's the better way to read Paul's letter to Galatians, and specifically his view of the law as bondage. Paul didn't feel that the law was bondage. He felt that the requirement of circumcision first, meaning the requirement of conversion prior to being counted as a genuine covenant member in Israel, he felt that that was bondage. So the policy of Jewish-only Israel, of Jewish-only Torah observance, the policy that was being regulated by the Judaisms of his day, Paul felt that that was bondage. And that's the bondage he doesn't want his Gentile Christian prospects to fall into. He doesn't want them to fall into that trap. That's a better way to read Galatians chapter 5. Instead of making Torah the villain of the piece, we make this proselyte conversion policy the villain of the piece. We make the policy that says that the Torah is a document for Jews only. We make that the villain of the piece. And therefore, we basically exonerate Torah. So in closing to question 9, the law that Paul is talking about being bondage is not the law of Moses per se. It is true theologically that if you're trying to keep the law because you think it'll save you, that is bondage. If you're unsaved and you think that your law keeping will earn you merit before God, that is bondage. That's spiritual bondage in your mind. That's true. However, historical context of Paul's writing is that the bondage that he's trying to warn the Galatians away from is the bondage of Jewish-only Israel, Jewish-only Torah-keeping, ethnic-driven covenant membership. That's the bondage he wants to warn his readers away from. So with that, let me close the commentary.